All right, so let's go ahead and dive into what's taking place in LA. And I want to start by talking about the posse comitatus side of things, the military side of things. But first, let's address what exactly is happening. You've probably heard by now, there have been, mass, I wouldn't say raids, but there have been people being taken by ICE around the country. And this has been, I've been talking about this for a while. There's been people who are legitimately here on visas being accused of being, anti-Semitic and connected to Hamas, and then later being proven not to have any connections, or some distant relative worked for the Hamas government or something like that. Just different things that the Trump administration is choosing to use to go after people. That's one thing, is the sort of anti-Semitic speaking against Israel. The other thing is, of course, accusing people of being gang members. We talked on this channel about different deportations that have happened and whether or not they have even been legal. But the point is, many people watched what happened under the Biden administration and just thought it was the worst thing ever. They've been told that millions of illegals have flooded the nation. And I will say that, yes, there are some legitimate estimates saying that there's probably millions of illegal people who did enter. And I don't even like that term. I don't really think any human can technically be illegal. I don't like working from within the state's framing of, thinking that the government controls borders. I think that's a whole foundational problem that we need to contend with, but that's not what today's show is about. So I'm going to set aside my voluntarist anarchist beliefs to just talk about the details of this story. Millions of people have entered the country throughout the Biden years and done so under very lax programs coming from so-called progressives. And many have also entered via human trafficking and drug trafficking and things like that. But at the same time, there have been numbers that have been vastly exaggerated, I would say, by a lot of right-wing Trump, MAGA, Rumble media that have overplayed and exaggerated certain things, and claims of people getting their pets ate by Venezuelan immigrants or others and things like that. There's a mix of lies and there's a mix of truth. I mean, this is just how things operate. We're not in a simple space anymore where we can just say, this is 100% true, this is 100% fake. Unfortunately, we get a mix of both. And you have to be willing to look beyond your own biases and not just listen to right-wing media or left-wing media or just even centrist media or mainstream or only alternative even. Because I know some people think anything that comes from the corporate media just inherently is false. And that's just simply not true. So these raids have been going on, and increasingly what's happening is people who are in the United States who don't have legal citizenship yet, but have a protected status or have appointments and they've been attending the appointments and have not committed crimes or been involved in anything. Those people show up to their appointments, and then upon arrival, they are arrested by ICE agents. Now, this is something that many people are protesting and pushing back against, because they're saying, look, okay, maybe we can justify or support you going and arresting some, illegal, some person who committed illegal crimes, was violent, rapist, murder, or whatever, and who came in the country illegally. We can get behind that, but we can't necessarily get behind, just taking people who are trying to go through the process and in kidnapping them when they show up for their appointments. So all of that has been brewing on for months now. And then recently there have been some ICE operations taking place in Los Angeles. And because of that, people are starting to push back. Exactly what I just described a moment ago. People who are upset or frustrated or concerned about how these people are being taken from their jobs or taken when they show up for appointments, and people not being allowed to contact their attorneys, or people not being allowed to communicate with their children, things of that sort. Things that in the United States, we have been taught to believe that all people are guaranteed. And I know some people still have a hard time understanding this, but yes, that applies to people who aren't citizens. If you're in the United States, it's supposed to be that you're guaranteed certain basic human decency and human rights. Now, that means you're guaranteed due process. Doesn't mean you're supposed to be allowed to stay for free or commit crimes and get away with it, but you're supposed to be given due process and considered innocent until proven guilty. That's something that all people in the United States, citizen or not, are supposed to be guaranteed. So as these raids have been going on from ICE, and as people have been resisting, people have in some cities been actually actively trying to stop the arrest and kind of pushing back and organizing. And this is actually something that I personally support. In fact, let's go ahead and jump to that before we get into the whole posse comitatus aspect, which I do absolutely want to cover here. Let's go ahead and I'll show you this tweet that I put out a couple days ago, which seemed to trigger some people, and as I expected that it would. But this is something I do believe. What I wrote here was, I support people resisting ICE and the federal government goons if they are attempting to take people whose only crime is crossing the border illegally. If they are nonviolent, contributing to their community and not harming anyone, then the feds are the aggressors. And that got, like I said, quite a bit of attention. Now, I mean what I say there. Look, if somebody is in their community and they came illegally 1 year ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, and they haven't harmed anyone, and for whatever reason, and you could sit here and debate, well, why didn't they get around to doing it? The immigration system is broken. I think most people understand that. Yes, the welfare state is a big part of the problem. So is the warfare part of the state. If there wasn't so much warfare being caused by the U.S. military, then perhaps people wouldn't feel the need to leave their countries after the U.S. is involved in coups and setting up puppet dictatorships and things like that. But then also, if you didn't have this massive welfare state promising things to get people here to support them in voting, then maybe people wouldn't be trying to come here legally. Either way, get rid of the warfare state and the welfare state, then we can talk. In the meantime, if somebody's in the country and they're nonviolent and they're just a person living their life, they're not harming anybody, maybe they got a job, they're serving the community in some way, then the federal government, as I said, is the aggressor in this situation. This is just a person living their life. Sure, if you're going to have government and there's going to be a legalization process for citizenship, then it should be something that makes sense. That's not what you have in the United States. Again, as an anarchist, I wish the federal government wasn't involved in borders at all. And the only borders we actually have are our private property borders. So if you invite somebody to your, to live here in the United States, in your home, you should have the right to do so, regardless of what the government says. If you invite somebody to come to the United States and work for you, you should have the right to do so. And, obviously, they have to come here and make their way and survive. And, you can decide if you want to put them up or what you want to do. But the point is, if somebody has a job or has been invited, then they should be allowed to come. Ultimately, the only borders you control are your private property. And beyond that, you can't even really control anything beyond that. And some people say you don't even really control that because the feds tax you on it and things like that. And I tend to agree. Nevertheless, let's go ahead and look a little bit deeper here. So here's another post I shared from Carrie Wedler. I can't imagine being more scared of LA getting rowdy against government agents than of the crushing surveillance and militarized police state the right is demanding to crack down in response. And so this is a response to people like Laura Loomer and others saying, send Palantir, out to go catch all the people causing crime. And Carrie, of course, clarified and said, I don't support the destruction of private property, but I also don't support tyranny. So also, I'm in LA, and I can verify I don't need Daddy Trump and the feds to liberate me, and the California government is still trash. So all of the things. Yes, you can be somebody who says, I don't support the feds coming here. I also don't support the government of California, and I don't support the destruction of private property, and I'm not going to cheer on or call for Palantir to come quote unquote save the day because I want to see, people crushed. Again, many of the reasons people are protesting is because of the way that the government is handling these raids. Some of you out there, maybe not so many who watch my show, but some of you out there will say, Derrick, this is exactly what I voted for. We can't let these illegals run wild. And again, I get it. I've talked about this. Go to theconsciousresistance.com, search immigration, see my interviews with Jeffrey Tucker, see all the work I've done about this over the years, talking about the immigration issue, not only talking about how it is a real problem, weaponized immigration, and it will be used by the predator class to manipulate and divide and control, but also at the same time, how people like many of you are falling for the trap and not recognizing that the fight against so-called illegal immigration is actually building the surveillance police state. And that's a big problem. And I've been warning about that since Trump's first administration. So I think what we're seeing today and the growth of that police state in the form of Trump, wanting to go around and grab people randomly if they're saying anti-Semitic things or if they're, if they haven't been here illegally and violating due process in the process. I don't think you guys understand where it's headed. I don't think you really see what's happening. Just another post here. This one was from the New York Times. Again, if you can hold but Derrick, the New York Times is always fake. This is a real story. You can verify it other ways. A Missouri town was solidly behind Trump. Then Carol was detained. Everyone knows Carol, said Lisa Dry, a Kennett City councilwoman. That all ended on April 30th when federal immigration officials summoned Carol, 45, to their office in St. Louis. And this is a little more of the background. Carol is a local, a waitress, a woman that everybody in this area knew well and loved and cared about. Carol's partner, a Guatemalan immigrant, had voiced suspicion about the sudden call. But Carol said, I don't want to run. In a jailhouse phone interview, I just wanted to do the right thing. She was arrested and jailed to await deportation. Carroll's detention has forced a rural Missouri county to face the fallout of President Trump's immigration crackdown, which was supported in theory by many residents in this Trump-loving corner of an increasingly red America. Many are now asking how you can support Carroll and also Mr. Trump. One person says, I voted for Donald Trump, and so did practically everyone here, but no one voted to deport moms. We were all under the impression that we were just getting rid of the gangs, the people who came here in droves. This is Carroll. Adam Squires, a one-time candidate for local town mayor, says he saw it differently. He does not bear ill will for Carroll, but he said he voted for Trump, as did 80% of the people in Dunklin County, and he was glad to see the deportation campaign reach home. They voted for Trump, and then they get mad because the stuff starts happening. He said of his neighbors, we've got to get rid of all of the illegals. This is just a start. So some people are taking it that way. Others are having a little bit of Trump voters remorse, and it makes me happy. As I posted on social media recently, it does make me happy to see people having Trump voter remorse. I wish that they would think about this deeper when people like myself are warning. And then still others can't quite get their freaking thick heads around it to understand that what's happening to you or what's happening to immigrants or somebody else can and will eventually be used against you. And you're just maybe too blind to see it. Now let's go into the legal aspect, the posse comitatus angle. Posse comitatus is a practice, that a legal doctrine that basically says that the military is not supposed to intervene in domestic affairs. There's supposed to be a separation. Local cops are only supposed to patrol local areas. You're not supposed to have the military on American soil because, well, we have bad memories of the king from the UK and the British king and his soldiers and his troops. And so that was something that has always been around. It's been a tradition in the United States. It's been violated a couple times, of course, as these things tend to be. But now that there are, I think at the last count, 700 Marines in Los Angeles, as well as thousands of National Guard troops. Some people are saying, and I'm one of them, that posse comitatus is being violated right now. And so while this is going on, Pete Hegseth, who's the former Fox News host, who's now Secretary of Defense, he was going to Capitol Hill to D.C. for congressional hearings over the next week, which are going to be, of course, lots of questions about his job as defense secretary and what Trump is doing in L.A. So the hearings, which began today, will be the first time Hegseth testified to Congress since his confirmation hearings in January. Lawmakers will get their chance to question him under oath about his role in Signalgate from a while back, but also they will be questioning him about the plans to mobilize Marines in Los Angeles, the large-scale military operation against the Houthis in Yemen, and so on. So it's going to be interesting to see if he does discuss posse comitatus and does see, like, if it's been violated. On Saturday night, though, he posted on Twitter, quote, the Department of Defense is mobilizing the National Guard immediately to support federal law enforcement in Los Angeles. And if violence continues, active duty Marines at Camp Pendleton will also be mobilized. They are on high alert. So there's going to be more questions about this. Will there be lawsuits? Will anything happen? I'm not going to hold my breath. Nevertheless, at least some people are taking note of this, and not only in the mainstream, but back over here to Twitter with Spiro. For those of you who remember Spiro, he's done great work over the years. I shared his tweet the other day. He said, to those who are calling for the military to be deployed to LA, this is exactly what the ones pulling the strings want. Problem, reaction, solution. Don't fall for it. Can the U.S., and he has like a little, I think this is probably an AI answer that he shared, asking the question, can the U.S. military be used for law enforcement? And it says, what is the Posse Comitatus Act? It is a federal law prohibiting federal armed forces from participating in civilian law enforcement activities, either civil or criminal. This means that, generally speaking, active duty U.S. military personnel cannot be used for domestic law enforcement. They're probably going to argue these are not active duty Marines. Nevertheless, it's still a step in that direction. U.S. military on American soil doesn't look good. Doesn't feel good to a lot of us. I think people are concerned about that and what it means. Now, let's look at the other side of things. There are, to be fair, provocateurs, and we're going to talk about them in a moment, burning cars. There are people throwing rocks and things at cops. And look, I'll admit, part of me, the rebellious part, the anarchist part, the revolutionary part, could not care less about rocks being thrown at government vehicles and things like that. I'm not saying I wish these random people to crash and die, but one part of me does say, well, look, they are upholding the system of statism and violence and death, and they are a government employee. They need to be called out. At some point, you can't just say, I'm just following orders. You got to quit if you actually have morals and principles and values. Nevertheless, I know that just throwing rocks or burning, driverless vehicles and setting them on fire. I even saw a report about a local news crew. They had their news van ransacked and burned and things like that. That's not sending the message that people might think they are. If it started about trying to protect certain families, again, I know some of you won't agree with this, but if it started about trying to push back against ICE and protect families from being torn apart, well, then that's where the message should stick. Instead, as typical, there are provocateurs. I know many people believe on January 6, 2021, that there were provocateurs out there playing games, and sort of those are the ones who got violent with the cops. Some people disagree with that, but I've seen many MAGA out there claim that. So don't be silly now and act like you don't realize that there are provocateurs out there. Provocateurs always exist. So while I said a moment ago in that tweet that generally speaking, I support people's right to resist and push back against government, I think I've talked about that for years. I mean, you can go to the consciousresistance.com and look up freedom cells applied to immigration raid. You can look up videos titled "This is how you stop a kidnapping," where I've talked about if we got more coordinated and build mutual aid and defense groups, we could actually resist things like that, whether it's the government trying to come take somebody away to force vaccinate them, or the government trying to come take somebody away because they don't like their immigration status. Some of you might not agree with both of those, but I think they're both valuable tactics and we need to get more organized. So my point here is that it is important for people to organize on the ground level. I know that scares some people. They see mass protests being organized and they think, oh my God, it's going to be the summer of love, George Floyd, it's going to be riots in the street. Could be true, could be, definitely possible. I'm not saying that isn't possible, and I'm also not saying that there are no provocateurs, as I'm going to talk about more in a moment, but we also have to understand that there are legitimate reasons that people are protesting this. I think this is where the nuance gets lost in there. People just want it to be, those are just a bunch of leftist idiots who want open borders, and so, screw them all, send in the National Guard, use Palantir, etc. And those people don't see how they're playing right into the trap of the Bilderberg members and the technocrats by cheering on their own future enslavement. Right now, you're saying, okay, cool, they're going to use it against these crazy leftist, radical progressives that I hate, but you can't even fathom that it would potentially be used against you in the future. Wake up. It will one day, okay? So you have just this nuance being lost in there. Yes, I do think there's problems with the way Trump is carrying out the deportation operations. Even if you think the deportations are perfectly legitimate, the way they're being handled, people going in to appointments and being taken away from their workplaces, their churches, that is obviously going to cause a reaction in people. And that at the same time, when people react and they protest, if you send in the military and the National Guard, that's going to make people react and protest more because, and in fact, any of you out there who consider yourself patriots or freedom lovers, conservatives, libertarians, should absolutely be protesting the use of the military in the U.S. streets, posse comitatus, things like this. This is not something we should be embracing or supporting at all. And that doesn't mean you need to embrace the left-wing causes and things like that. But I just wish this could be more of a uniting issue that people could say left, right, whatever. We can't allow this to happen because this is going to go bad places. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be that's where we're at. And of course, on top of all that, I don't support randomly burning, looting, setting things on fire. It doesn't help your own community. In fact, it hurts the poorest people in the end. So if you really care about trying to help people, setting vehicles on fire typically isn't the best way to get your message across and to, get people to be sympathetic to your cause. And that's one other thing that I think people really need to realize is that it is, if you're building a movement, I'm somebody who has spent a lot of time focused on movement building. If you're trying to build a movement, you need to think about the court of public opinion. And if you can't get the public on your side because you're burning things down, or if in the case of MAGA, if you can't get the masses, the public on your side because they see you as supporting a fascist, it's kind of hard to build a movement. So it's time to get past the partisan games and just be a blind sycophant for Trump. And it's also time to recognize that there are legitimate problems with weaponized immigration and find somewhere in the middle to come together. I don't really think that's on the agenda. That's not on the table, but that's what it's going to take to actually try to stop what's happening. Other than that, everybody else is going to fall for this agenda. You're going to see division in the streets. You're going to see the right wing and MAGA calling for using Palantir and using these weapons against their fellow Americans in many cases, not just illegal, violent criminal gang members like some of you think it is, but your neighbors it could be used against, and eventually it will be used against you. So I really hope that we can find some nuance in there. We're going to.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.